I welcome you all to the DSEJ home classes, an attempt to connect learner with instructor, a digital initiative by the Directorate of School Education, Jammu. Dear students, this is the image of an eagle carrying dove in its class. Have you ever seen an eagle carrying a dove in its tiredness class and its cruel beak pulling out innocent victim? Eagle is the symbol of violence and dove is the symbol of innocence. Well, you will see this innocent bird dove in the cruel beak of eagle in the poem which we are going to read today. The name of the poem is Inklings from the Dark, written by Rahman Rahi and translated from Kashmiri to English by Ghulam Rasool Malik. Before reading the poem, let me introduce you to the poet who has written this poem, Inklings from the Dark. This is written by Rahman Rahi. He was born in the year 1925. He is the most outstanding modern Kashmiri poet, a former professor of Kashmiri and also a professor emeritus of the University of Kashmir. He is the author of several books of poems and literary criticism. He is the recipient of numerous literary awards, including the Sahitya Academy Award, Kabir Saman, and the American-based Irfan Kotwari Foundation Award. Here is the central idea of the poem. Inklings from the Dark, written by Rahman Rahi and translated from Kashmiri by G.R. Malik, is a metaphysical poem. It is the translation of one of Rahman Rahi's most powerful Kashmiri poem, Paichu Zulmate Wuza. It is a highly imaginative synthesis of various creative impulses. The poem can be used to interpret in different ways. It expresses a gradual shift from despair and sadness to hope and promise of happiness. At the beginning of the poem, we find the poet disturbed by the thoughts of violence and the alienation on the weak by the hands of the powerful. But later, we find solace in the innocent, peaceful sleeping of his son. The poem shows that there are lessons to be learned even in the darkest of the night, just like the oyster that undergoes trouble and faces excruciating pain to finally yield a pearl. Though the poem starts on a depressing note as there is violation and bloodshed, and it concludes on a positive note and hope for the better future, that is, signed by the sun, who is the symbol of the future. Here is the poem Inklings from the Dark, written by Rahman Rahi and translated by Ghulam Rasool Malik. Yesternight my sleep driven off and the thread of my fancy slit. I espied an eagle in the wide shadows of my mind. On its beak, in the same old fashion, smouldered the blood of the dove, whose feathers were shed by hilltops into the atmosphere. Turning my head on the pillow, I sighted a deep dark chasm, and rose and leaned my back against the wall with the cool of the winter in the marrow of my breast. This is the explanation of the first stanza. In this stanza, the poet says that he was lost in his thoughts last night. Suddenly he saw an eagle in the shadows of his mind. The eagle appeared with its victim, dove, in its beak. The poor dove was killed. Its feathers fell by the tops of the hills. They are scattered into the atmosphere, that is, the area surrounding the hilltops. He suddenly got up, leaned his back against the wall, with the cool of the winter in the marrow of his breast. He was feeling very cold. He feels disturbed by the thoughts of a violent act that he committed somewhere in the past. He felt the wintry cold quite intensely. This is the second stanza of the poem. My lips froze dry as whisperings reached me from outside the window. The snowflakes were sailing into the shelter of the crevices. Not a mouse did creep from under the box to the store cabinet. In place of my upper garment, a cat hung by the hanger, rubbing my eyes. I tried to pull the quilt up to my cold back, but oh, the kangri shook and the cold, hapless ashes kissed my feet, while the owl hooted outside, oh, woe to you, oh, woe. Fain would I have raised a cry of lament, had my heart stood by me. He heard whisperings coming from outside the window. The snowflakes were falling gently into the openings in the window. There seemed no end to his feelings of fear. He was further frightened on spotting a cat hung by the hanger. He rubbed his eyes in surprise, as if he could not understand what was happening around. He was feeling cold, and so he pulled the quilt up to his back. The pull made the kangri shake. The cold, hapless ashes kissed his feet. The owl hooted outside ominously. He felt as if the owl was saying that he would have no peace of mind. This is last stanza of the poem. Suddenly I called my mind, my darling son. How raptly did he listen to my bedtime tale last night, when I told him of the agony of the oyster in her travails. But he only heard part of the tale when sleep overtook him. I rose like a moonstruck man and turned on the light, and found him lying by the wall like a mushroom on the mound, in deep slumber with fragrant blossoms blooming on his lips, and a drop of sweat dawned afresh, playing on his brow. Perchance he was dreaming the rest of the tale, perchance the oyster had laboured forth a pearl. In the last stanza of the poem, the poet thought of his darling son. He had heard his bedtime tale last night, when he had told him of the acute pain of the oyster during her labour pains. The boy had fallen asleep. The son had not heard the complete tale from his father, the poet. All these images that came in his mind in succession made him rise like a madman. He switched on the light and saw his son lying deeply asleep like a mushroom on the mountain. A drop of sweat appeared on his brow. The poet thought as if his son was dreaming the remaining part of the bedtime tale. Perhaps the oyster had given forth a pearl. Thus, the poem, which begins with a note of gloom and fright, suddenly ends on a note of hope and prosperity. The poetic techniques which are used by the poet Rahman Rahi in the poem are metaphor, simile, personification, and symbolism. I will define one by one. Metaphor. A poet generally uses comparison between two objects while giving meaning to one of them. Often, Forms of the to be verbs are used, such as is or was, to make the comparison. Another poetic technique used in the poem is simile. When a comparison is made between two objects using a specific word or comparison such as like, as or than. Personification. We have already learned in previous poem about the personification. This figure of speech endows animals, ideas or inanimate objects with human traits. Symbolism. Symbolism is a device which is used to represent or recall something else possessing similar qualities, especially an object representing an abstract thought. These are some of the lines from the poem Inklings from the Dark, in which poetic techniques are used. The first line is, "The thread of my fancies slit." In this line, metaphor is used. "The cool of the winter in the marrow of my breast." In this line also, metaphor is used. "The hapless ashes kissed my feet." Here, ashes are personified and personification is used here. "Like a moonstruck man." This is simile, because we know the comparison in which words like or as are used is called as simile. "Found him lying by the wall like a mushroom on the mount." This is also simile. "Fragrant blossoms blooming on his lips." Here the poet uses metaphor. "A drop of sweat dawned afresh playing on his brow." This is also metaphor. Eagle. Eagle is a symbol of violence, and dove, it is a symbol of innocence. Sun is also used as a symbol of hope for future and prosperity.